Hello, everybody. So today's lesson is over dividing fractions using models. So this is just a different way to show how to divide fractions. For all my visual learners, this is going to be something that hopefully you really like and understand. And even if you're not a visual learner, it's just a really good way that you can visualize dividing fractions. So there's two types of problems that we're going to focus on. The first one is dividing whole numbers by fractions. So just going to go through our first example because the first example actually takes us through what our steps are for this process. I do highly recommend using 4 different colors. You need at least 4 different colors for fraction modeling. If you don't have any or you just don't want to do that, that's totally fine. But using different colors for each step really helps visualize and see everything a little bit more clearly. But anyways, let's just hop right into it. So when we're doing fraction models, every single one you're going to have a large rectangle, okay? So our first step is to draw that rectangle, and you're splitting this rectangle into 3 pieces. And the reason it's 3 pieces is because that's what this whole number is. So I'm actually going to use red. So let me mark over that. The 3 pieces we're splitting it into comes from this whole number. So we're breaking our large rectangle into 3 pieces. So I'm just going to draw a line. And I've got 1, 2, 3 pieces now. Perfect. My second step is to look at the denominator of the divisor. So the divisor is the second number in our problem. So we're going to look at the denominator and then split each rectangle. So we have 3 rectangles now into that many pieces. So our denominator here is 4. So I'm going to make each of these little rectangles have 4 pieces in it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. So that is how you do step 2. You got that number from the denominator of our divisor. Okay, so then step 3, I am going to switch colors. Look at the numerator, or the top, and you count that many pieces and circle them. So we're making groups of 3 because that's what our numerator of the divisor is. So you count your circles, 1, 2, 3. So I'm going to circle these 3 rectangles. 1, 2, 3 rectangles. I'm going to circle. And you just keep going until you run out of rectangles or you have an odd number. In this case, I ran out. So I made my groups of 3. Step 4 is you count how many circles, and that's actually your answer. So if our answer were a mixed number, then this is when you would worry about the second part of what this step says. In this case, all we have are circles. So 1, 2, 3, 4 circles. So my answer for this problem is actually 4. Now, if I were to have a piece left over, like let's say I had one little extra rectangle down here all by himself and I couldn't put him in a group, that would actually turn in to a fraction, so then our answer would be a mixed number. If that were the case, my answer would actually be 4 1/4. So if I have any leftover pieces, that will turn into a fraction. It will be the number of pieces left over the numerator because that is the number of pieces I'm putting into each group. So what I'm saying is, I'm not going to put this extra 1 over 4 because we're not putting them in groups of 4 anymore. We're putting them in groups of 3. So If I were to have this one little thing left over, my answer would actually be 4 1/3. But we don't have one little thing left over. We have an even 4. So that was our first problem. Not super difficult, but that's why I said it's easier if you have different colors so that you can visualize it better. So going into our second example, I already have the big rectangle drawn out for us. So step 1, we have to draw a certain amount of rectangles, which means we're breaking this big rectangle up into a certain amount of pieces. We get that from our dividend, which is the whole number, the first number in our problem. So I'm going to break this up into 4 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just do your best you can to make them as even as possible. So we're making 4 rectangles. I'm going to switch colors. For step 2, we're going to divide each rectangle into a certain amount of pieces. Now we get this number from our denominator. So I'm going to just underline that. So we're breaking each of these into 5 pieces. I'll do that very quickly. All right. Step 2, done. I broke each of these into 5 pieces. Now step 3. Step 3 is when I count a certain amount of pieces and circle them. So we get this number from the numerator, which in this case is 3. So I'm counting 3 pieces and circling them. So let's do that real quick. 1, 2, 3. Circle. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You don't have to put the numbers inside the rectangles like I'm doing, but when you have lots of little pieces, it helps kind of see what rectangles you are circling a little bit easier, so that you don't accidentally circle 4 or 2 instead of the 3 that you're needing for this problem. So if you notice, I actually have 2 pieces left over this time. So let's go on over to step 4. So I'm going to count my circles, which is the whole number for my answer. And then I'm going to count any leftover pieces, which in this case I have 2. And then remember, we're putting it over 3 because that's how many pieces I'm putting into each group. So let's go back. Count the circles. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I've got 6 circles. I'll put my answer down here. I'm going to count any leftover pieces. 1, 2. That becomes my numerator. And my denominator is 3 because that's how many pieces I'm putting in to each group. So this becomes my final answer for this problem up here, 4 divided by 3/5. This is now my answer. So this is the first type of fraction model that we are going to do, and the second type is fractions divided by fractions. So before it was whole numbers divided by fractions, and now we're doing a fraction divided by a fraction. This one it might take a little more time than whole number divided by fraction, but I got everything written out, so let's just jump right into it. Again, highly suggest you use lots of different colors just to help organize and see everything a little bit clearer, but not a big deal if you don't. First step is you have to have a common denominator. Usually when you are dividing fractions using KCF or keep change flip, you don't have to have a common denominator. But when we are doing fraction models, it is super important that you have a common denominator. So we'll check to see for that. In this case, we actually do have a common denominator, so we don't have to do anything. Moving on to step 2, I want you to look at the denominator, which is the bottom number, and we're going to divide our big rectangle into that many pieces. So our denominator here is 8, so we're going to break up our big rectangle into 8 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Perfect. Excuse me. Step 3, we're going to shade in the amount of pieces that are in the dividend, which is our first fraction. So we're focusing on the numerator now. We're going to shade in the amount of pieces that are in the dividend. The dividend is our first fraction. So we're going to shade 5 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Perfect. And then our final step, we are trying to see how many groups of 3/8 we can get. So now we're going to count 3 pieces and circle them. So just like we were kind of doing before, you're going to count 3 pieces and circle them. The number of circles becomes our whole number, and if I have any shaded pieces left, that will make your fraction. Once we're only dealing with the shaded pieces now, so yes, we know we're going to have these 3 blank rectangles left over, but we can ignore them because once we have our shaded pieces, those are the only rectangles that we're having to deal with. So going back to the beginning, you're trying to see how many groups of 3/8 you can get. So I'm going to count 3 pieces and circle. So 1, 2, 3, circling them, 1, 2, oh, I've got some left over. So now my answer, to get the answer, it is how many circles that I have. That's my whole number. And then I have my 2 leftover pieces. I'm going to put that number over 3 because, again, I'm putting 3 pieces in a group. So my final answer for this problem is going to be 1 because I have 1 circle, and 2 over 3 because I have 2 pieces left over that I could not put in a group of 3. So this is what your model should look like. Just remember that the circles are always your whole numbers and the leftover pieces become the fraction that might give you a mixed number. So our second example for fraction divided by fraction, let's go through our steps. So first step is we have to have a common denominator. So let's check for that. And in this case, we actually don't have a common denominator. So we need to use LCM to find a common denominator. So I'm going to put my denominators over here in a ladder. 3 is a common factor for both of these. So that would give me a 2 and a 1. I find the LCM by making my L and multiplying everything in the L. So my LCM is 6 because it's 3 times 2 times 1. So now I have to rewrite my fraction problem with my common denominator. Because my first fraction already has a 6 as the denominator, I don't have to change it. But my second fraction does not. So to get from 3 to 6, I had to multiply by 2. So that's what I have to do to my numerator as well. So 2 times 2 is 4. So this is my new problem that we're going to be looking at. You can ignore this because you have to have common denominators. And if not, you can't solve the problem. So now this is what we're looking at. So now let's move on to step 2. We're going to divide our rectangle into 6 pieces because we're getting that number from our common denominator. So let's break this up into 6 pieces. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Perfect. Now for step 3, we're going to shade in 5 of the 6 pieces. We get that from our first fraction, okay? Our dividend. That's where we get that number from. So we're going to shade in 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Perfect. And now we're going to circle how many pieces? 4. We're only using shaded pieces. Remember, we can ignore our blank pieces, which in this case is only 1. And then we use any leftover pieces to make our fraction part of the answer. So we're putting our groups of 4 into the circle, so we've got to make groups of 4. So I'm going to count them out. 1, 2, 3, 4, and I will circle it. And then I have one single left over. So to get my answer, I count how many circles I have. That's my whole number, so it's 1. And then I have my leftover piece, which becomes my numerator. And my denominator is not 6, it's actually 4, because that's how many pieces I'm putting in to each group. So this is now my final answer for this problem based on our fraction model. You can use keep, change, flip to check your answer if you're unsure if you did the model correctly. But remember, if I ask for a model to be used, I do expect you to use one of these methods depending on the problem. You always can use KCF to check your answer, but if I ask for a model, you must draw out your model.